Holly, take me through your journey, but take me back to the beginning. When did your addiction start? Whether it was to Vicodin, cocaine, heroin, how did you get hooked on these different kind of drugs?
I had grown up here in Toms River, and I was bullied a lot when I was in school. My father had suffered from mental illness, and he was also an alcoholic and a drug addict. And several times throughout my life, he had tried to commit suicide. So from very early on, I was dealing with a lot of different issues. I had several abusive relationships, and I had often used drugs recreationally through like my late teens and my early 20s, whether it was smoking pot or drinking on and off, ecstasy. I always tried something, but it wasn't until I was in my late 20s and I was 27, and I had my parents had gotten divorced, and my father had gotten remarried and moved up to Nutley. And I was still living down here. And once he married my stepmother, he kind of backed away from me. And he would call me when she wasn't around. And this one day he had called me and asked me to come up for breakfast one morning, and I couldn't because I was working. And the other thing is, my father used to always, whenever he did attempt to take his life, he would always call me, and I would always be able to intervene somehow. And this one time that he called me, it didn't sound like his normal phone call to me, telling me he was going to try to take his own life. But he asked me to come up for breakfast, and I couldn't go up that day. And he's like, okay. He's like, I'll call you tomorrow. And this was on a Saturday. And I never heard from him Sunday. I never heard from him Monday. And by Tuesday morning, I knew there was something not right. And I drove up to his apartment, and I walked in, and I found him dead on the floor. He had committed suicide. And it was at that moment that I had felt like I had died along with him. And a few weeks later, I had went to the dentist to have my wisdom teeth pulled, and I was prescribed Vicodin. And it was at that moment when, all the years of hurt that I had already had, and from the death of my father, when I took the first pill, I felt this feeling come over me that, it made not only the physical pain go away, but the emotional and mental pain that I had felt as well. It was basically numbing my pain. And from that point forward, I started abusing Vicodin, and I started going out with somebody that was also very abusive. He was 18 years older than me, but he kind of filled that role of a father. And during that time, I had went to one rehabilitation center, but I knew what I was doing. I knew what to say to get out, and I was out within 9 days. But a few months later, I found myself pregnant with my son, and for the next year, I remained clean. Throughout my pregnancy, I remained clean. And about 4 months after I had him, I did as well, until my then husband, like I had said, was very abusive. He would call me names, just a horrible, horrible relationship. And I had got it in my mind because I had heard about people saying about the cocaine diet, and I wanted to lose the weight. And again, I had seeked out certain people in order to find that, and I wound up getting addicted to cocaine at that point. Flash forward a couple years. It was at that point, though, that my life, it wasn't unmanageable yet. I was still holding a job. I still had, I had money in the bank. I had cars, or I had a car. I had separated from my husband and got my own apartment. And it wasn't unmanageable yet. I would look forward to the weekends coming because my son would go to his father, and at that point, I knew I was going to party all weekend long. But when I moved into my apartment, I had a kind of like a housewarming party, and there were, people there, and my coke had ran out, and somebody had said they had something that would take the edge off, and that was the first time that I had used heroin. And from that point forward, within a matter of 4 months, I had lost everything. I had to move back in with my mother, and for the next 2 years, I was, as they say, ripping and running. My son was still with me, even though DCP&P had been contacted, and I was only supposed to have supervised visits. His father let me have him during the week, and he would go with him on the weekends. And in June of 2014, I remember it was a beautiful beach day. And, my son would always ask me, because he was 4 at that time, to do different things with him. And if I couldn't, I would always say, oh, mommy's sick, I have to go to the doctor, and I'll be back. That was my way of, because I was dope sick at that time, and I'd have to go and get better, and then I would come home. When this one morning, I had gotten up, and, he asked me to go to the beach, and I was like, yeah, it's okay. We'll go. Just let mommy go to the doctor, and I'll be back. And I remember backing out of my mother's driveway, and he was standing in the door, and he had like this huge smile on his face, and he was waving, and I stopped the car and I looked over and I saw him, and I said, there's no way I can keep doing this to him. And because I knew at that point I was either going to end up dead or in jail. And to be quite honest, I didn't care at that point. My addictions began long before the drugs. It was patterns of relationships that I was in. No matter what set of friends I had, I always adapted to the way they were because I was never comfortable enough with myself or to be who I really was, and I wanted to be. So when I got down to the corner of my mother's street, I called her and I told her I wasn't coming back. And for the next 4 months, I lived out of my car, and I actually used to park my car in Bayhead train station, and I would get up the next morning and then go to the Exxon station to, if I felt like it, wash my face, brush my teeth, maybe change my clothes, and then go across the street to the 7-Eleven and pick cigarette butts up out of the ashtray because I had just enough money to make it up north to go get my fix for the day so I could figure out what it is I was going to do to repeat the same thing the next day. What I didn't know at the time was my mother, because I had taken money from my mother, from a trust from my grandmother. You name it, I pretty much did it. She was working with a detective out of Ocean County, and she was trying to have a warrant put out for me because she knew that was the only way that I was going to be stopped. And she said she would rather get a phone call that I was in jail than the morgue. And she successfully did that. In October of 2014, I was arrested, and I was transported to the Ocean County Jail. And there was a judge, Judge Blaney, and he saw that I had only been, 3 weeks clean by the time I had seen him, and he kept me in the jail. And he ordered a task evaluation, and I was upset because I had never been in trouble, so I didn't understand why I wasn't getting let go. But because of him keeping me there and ordering this task evaluation, it gave me time. And when I called my son on Christmas Eve, he was 5 then, and I said, "Hi, honey." I said, "How are you?" I said, "Are you excited that Santa's coming?" And I asked him, what he had asked Santa for presents. He said to me, "Mommy, instead of presents, can Santa just bring you home for Christmas morning?" And it was at that moment that I knew I had to change, that something had to change. Something changed in me. I heard that little voice, and again, he's only 5, and instead of presents, all he wants is me home for Christmas morning. So a few weeks later, I went back to court in front of this judge, and he gave me a chance, and he sent me to Turning Point in Patterson, and I completed a 28-day program. And it was difficult because for the first time, I had to feel every ounce of pain I ever went through in my life and do it clean and sober. But I gave it my all, and because I was ready and I wanted it. And when I came home, I completed a 3-month IOP and started going to meetings. And I actually added 2 daughters to my family. I ended up actually getting divorced, and somebody from my childhood, actually, we reconnected, and I'm currently engaged. And we added 2 daughters to our family. But after the birth of my second daughter, I started to feel, because recovery is a lifelong thing. You don't just, recover and then you're done. Addiction is a beast, and it lies dormant in you. And if you don't take care of yourself, it's going to resurface. So I knew enough when I started feeling old ways coming back into me that I spoke at a meeting. I shared on what they call a burning desire, and I said I felt like I was losing myself. I had no purpose anymore. All I was doing was taking care of kids, which was great, but I wanted more. And there was a woman there that went back, and she said that she might know of something, and she went to my now boss and told her about me. And the next day, I was told to email my resume, and I currently work as a peer recovery specialist for the Mental Health Association in Ocean, and I help other recovering addicts on their journey. And it's been such a rewarding experience, I can't even put it into words. But I think it's important because, those suffering from a substance use disorder, they're not bad people that are trying to become good. We were just sick people that needed to get better, and there's such a power that is in a peer. You learn to turn your pain into power, and you use that power to help others see that there is always a way out. Being a peer is different than being a counselor because, we have real life experience. So that's pretty much the short version of it. Tried to keep it shorter, so...
No, I think you covered a lot of great points and a lot of points of your journey from beginning to now. I want to go back to your father a little bit, and of course your childhood. That relationship with him, and the relationship you had with your friends at school or your boyfriends at the time. Did that just start to pile up on you? Is that what kind of got you hooked on the drugs or following what other people were doing?
Absolutely. It was, my family had always taught us that we don't air our business. So if I was feeling a certain way and wanted to talk to somebody about it, it was ingrained in me not to say anything. Because what are people going to say? And, people are going to judge you. So from very early on, I remember my father had a DWI, and I think I was 3 or 4 years old. And so my whole young life, there was always something going on, and I was never able to talk about it. I mean, I'm an only child. I have a very small family, and because of that, there was a point in time where my family didn't have a lot of money. We had a house and the cars, but there wasn't enough money to get me like the cool clothes or, and I was very sheltered. I wasn't allowed to go out and do things with other kids. I would play with like neighborhood kids and stuff like that. But when it came time to go to school, I was never allowed to do anything. So I was very socially awkward from the very beginning. And when I started to interact with other kids, I didn't know how to. I was never involved in anything when I was younger. I was never in sports. I was never, put into, cheerleading or gymnastics until, I was older and in high school. So I never got that experience. And, again, Toms River is a big town, but it's also a very small town. So everybody knows everybody's business. And, people very quickly found out that, my dad was, an alcoholic, but he, no matter what, he was a good provider. I remember when he lost his license, and because he did heating and air conditioning, and instead of him just giving up at that point, he went with a cart and used to walk through Holiday City trying to find, boilers to clean and different things like that. So, no matter, he was, as they call, a functioning alcoholic and addict, but he was also very unhappy himself. He never really knew happiness, and it always seemed like no matter how hard he tried, he always got knocked back down. I remember trips to Paul Kimball Crisis Center. So I watched this at a very early age. So in a way, it's like I learned it, and again, as I got older, I remember there was a time when one boyfriend who happened to not be abusive had broken up with me for somebody else, and I was at a friend's house, and I was upset. Obviously a teenage girl, has a boy that she likes, break up with her, you're going to be upset. And one of my friends that were there at the time, they gave me a joint for the first time. And that was part of my problem, was that I was always a follower. I was never a leader. I was always afraid that the friends that I had, if I didn't do what they were doing, I was going to lose them, not realizing at that time that if somebody is your friend, they're going to like you for who you are, not what you do. Mm-hmm. So it took a long time for me. And again, through Turning Point and, the counselor that I had there, that was absolutely amazing. I learned that it's okay to be who I am and to have my voice be heard. And, again, just be who I want to be and do the things that I want to do, regardless of what anybody else says. And this is something that's really important, is that, when I was in the rehab, my counselor had me do a timeline. And on this timeline, she had me put every experience that I had gone through, good, bad. And it made me realize, looking at it, how much I had survived. But it also made me realize that there were, no matter what stage I was at in my life, when I was younger, I was considered the nerd, the dork. I was judged for that. When I became a teenager, I started dating somebody that, was a senior, I was a sophomore. And I became a cheerleader at that point. So I went from being the dork and the nerd to being popular. Then from that phase, when I was in my 20s, I had a really good job. I was really successful at that. So then I was judged for that, and then when I was in my 30s, I became the drug addict, the junkie. And my point is, no matter what stage I was at in my life, or no matter who I was judged for it. So I think it's important that people understand that no matter who you are, you're going to be judged, because you're not going to please everybody. And as long as you please yourself, that's what matters.
Through the time you were a teenager into your 20s and your 30s, watching your father battle alcoholism, lose his license, get bullied, have abusive relationships yourself, how much did the peer pressure and certainly above all that mental health play a factor or a role in what you were watching or witnessing, and certainly what you were experiencing or going through yourself? Maybe with that lack of confidence in yourself and your own abilities, thinking about what other people thought about you and what you were doing. Is mental health, or was your mental health, a big factor in contributing to your abuse of drugs and the lifestyle that you were living for a while?
I believe so. While I was never diagnosed with a mental illness myself, I think when you're going through things emotionally, that absolutely affects your mental well-being. And I think that had I dealt with the emotional issues that I was going through, that I would have been able to mentally handle. I couldn't mentally handle life. That was the problem. I couldn't mentally handle being made fun of, because if I got my feelings hurt, that would mess with my brain. It would mess with, how I felt as a person. So I think, just because you don't have a mental diagnosis of a mental illness, there is something called that I call it, like it's mental well-being. And if you're it's like there's three things. There's the spiritual, the mental, and the emotional, and the physical. And it's like if one is out of line, it can actually affect all of the other ones. And I think that's what it was. And even today now too, if I get physically drained, I can get emotionally irritable and mentally drained. Everything kind of goes hand in hand with one another. And I think it's important to make sure that you take care of all of those areas.
What was your breaking point? I know before your mom was working with a detective in Ocean County to have you arrested, and you were sitting in jail. Maybe there was some lifesavers thrown out there to try to rescue you from, the throngs of addiction there and to try to save you from yourself. What was the breaking point for you? Was it talking to your son on the phone from a jail cell, or something before that or after that said, okay, now I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to stay clean, get clean, stay clean. I'm done with my, addiction to drugs?
Prior to being in jail, there really wasn't much that would have helped me at that point. It was the phone call to my son. The months I had in jail before calling him, I was getting cleaner. Time was passing, and, as the drugs, like they say, your brain goes back to normal, but I still wasn't getting it because I didn't know how to deal, because I still had all of that hurt. But when I called my son and I heard that voice, I want to say something, it was like a switch that flipped in me. And I didn't know how, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew somehow I had to find a way to deal with everything that I had gone through and get myself better, because there was a little person that was depending on me. And, again, when I had went before the judge, I believe it was actually January 12th of 2015, and he had allowed me to, go to a rehabilitation center instead of going to prison or, spending more time in the county jail. He gave me the chance. And I think that's where it started too, was somebody gave me a chance. And between having, the conversation with my son on Christmas Eve in my head, and having, somebody of that type of authority figure, see something in me and give me that chance, that meant the world to me. And then going to Turning Point and having my counselor, where I sat in her office, and she allowed me to cry, and for as long as I needed, and she showed me that compassion that I needed for most of my life. And that's another critical point. She had that compassion and empathy and understanding, and she helped me realize that the things I had gone through in my life weren't going to define me. They the mistakes that I made, I don't have to pay for them for the rest of my life, that I start from today and I move forward. And for all those three things, and again, everybody has the want in them to get clean, or to beat whatever addiction they have, because addiction is more than just substance use. It's a whole bunch of different areas. You could be addicted to a pattern of a lifestyle. And, I think that with all those things combined, I was just ready at that point. Like, I had that want. And since that point, my want to stay clean has always been stronger than my want to use. And when I feel it's starting to teeter, I know now that I have to pick up the phone and call somebody. I know I have support groups. I have resources that I learned that I can go to. And then it's okay to say, I'm having thoughts, and how am I going to deal with this? Because having thoughts are normal. There's nobody in recovery that isn't going to have a fleeting thought here and there. It's you learn to play the tape through, and you learn to pick up a phone instead of picking up and using and asking for help, and then it's okay to ask for help.
How has your relationship with your son, who I can't imagine your two younger kids would remember much of this, if anything, how has your relationship with your son changed from the time you were going through that addiction to the time you were in jail till now? How much does he remember? Does he ask a lot of questions about what's happened over the last few years?
He does remember certain things. He remembers, again, abuse between his father and I. He remembers things like that, but he was very young. He was recently told about 2 years ago over his summer break, because we had always told him that I was in the hospital. He did not know up until 2 years ago that I was in jail and that I was an addict. But we decided, my mother and I had decided about 2 years ago to sit down and talk to him because, again, with the way everybody can find everything out, we wanted him to hear it from me so he understood. And it's very funny. He wanted to know more. Like, he was asking, he was at his age, he was asking, well, what was the jail cell like? Was the food good? Different things like that. But, it looked like he had a sense of relief because I teach him that no matter what, you be honest. And that is one thing about my son. He is very honest. Sometimes, as they say, he's too honest. If I'm wearing something, he'll be like, Mommy, that looks ugly on you. You know what I mean? But I've instilled that honesty in him. And and that was the other reason why we decided to tell him, was because I didn't want him to find out some other day, and everything that I'm teaching him be able to come back to me and say, well, Mommy, you didn't tell me the truth, and you're telling me to be honest, but you lied to me. But he handled it very well. He's 9 years old now, and it seems like he's going on 18. The love that we had, that never changed. I still remember he came up when I was leaving Turning Point. He was there, and I just remember him running up to me, and I must have held him for 3 or 4 minutes, and just the look on his face. He's an amazing little person. He really is.
How have you used what you learned and what you went through at Turning Point to becoming a counselor at NJ Connect for Recovery? How can you use your experiences, everything you've been through since you were a teenager, your drug use into the 20s and 30s, how you dealt with the loss of your father, your relationship with your son, and then kind of coming new again in the last couple of years and now being engaged and having a new life ahead of you? How do you use all those experiences to guide somebody else who's going through something similar or some kind of addiction or who's really looking to escape themselves?
The first thing that I learned is that when somebody is going through something, a lot of times they just want to talk, especially in the beginning. They don't want to listen to somebody's advice. They don't want somebody to tell them, all right, well, this is what you have to do. And I think that's the first part of it, is actively listening to somebody and getting them to open up to you and building that trust and being a peer that has a real life lived experience that, can understand the pain of somebody that's going through a certain situation that I'm relatable to. It from what I've gone through, and again, every recovery journey is different. Every individual is different. What works for me might not work for somebody else. I've learned to always keep an open mind. I've learned to never judge anybody and to give them the time that they need and meet them where they're at. And I think that's one of the most important things, is realizing that everybody is going to go through something at a different time and in their time frame, and looking at each person as who they are, an individual. That's something that my counselor had taught me. She didn't look at me as just another number. She didn't look at me as a statistic. She looked at me as a person. And my treatment plan that I came up with her was unique for me and what I needed. And, the people that I deal with now, I do the same things with them, where, a timeline for one person I have them do might not work for somebody else. Somebody else may be better suited for a group setting. And that's why, too, even with NJ Connect for Recovery, it's, some people might not be able to sit in a group and they just want to, or sit in front of somebody. They may just want to sit on the phone with somebody and talk, and they may not know what to do, and the peer specialists and the certified alcohol and drug counselors that are there, they're able to assess the person's needs and link them to a viable treatment options in the state. Because when you're going through recovery or you're looking for recovery, it's very difficult, to try to find what to do. You could be sick, you could be mentally broken down. So to have somebody that has the resources and have somebody that's going to understand you can make all the difference in the world.
Holly, I want to close up with this. What's your piece of advice or the kind of things you would tell somebody who's battling an addiction, especially a drug addiction, even particularly somebody who, doesn't see the forest through the trees and says, well, I'm going to live my life. There's nothing wrong with me. What I'm doing is fine. I don't have a problem. I don't have an addiction. They don't see what they're doing and how it's affecting the people that love them, the people that care about them. How do you help them to see the light, to get clean, to stay clean, and maybe work on some of those relationships with their family and friends?
I've always said that for myself personally, that kicking the drugs was the easy part. It was everything else that came after it that was difficult. And for somebody that's just starting out on their journey, or, it's reach out if you need help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's very hard when somebody's not ready yet. And unfortunately, that's something that there's no program or peer or anybody until a person is ready, I think, and wants it, that can help, and that was always something that, when somebody is mandated to do something, again, somebody it might help, somebody it's not going to. But I think that getting resources, more available and following up with somebody. If you can get somebody on the phone or somebody in front of you and you have contact information for them, you keep reaching out to them and just letting them know you don't have to talk, but I am here and I'm checking on you because I care. And what I always say too is there's always hope, because hope stands for hold on, pain ends.
Holly, I want to thank you for taking out some time this morning to share your story and relive some of those tough memories, in hopes that anybody out there listening to this or reading about your story online will be able to find recovery and find a new life the way you have and have turned things around.
Oh, thank you. And I mean, recovery isn't easy, but it's possible. And we do recover, and I'm living proof of it. And there's so many people that are doing the same things that I'm doing. And that's why we're trying to get the word out that there are people that care, and we're going to understand, and we're going to be there for you. When you feel like you have nobody, there are people there for you.
And that's a great message to close up with too, and to get that out there. And I wish you all the best and continued success, and that you'll be able to stay clean and live the life that you want to live moving forward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.